This is actually the very first Mustang I ever built. Prior to this, my background was in the 70s. I had a sports car shop. I worked on a lot of European sports cars. I also worked on a lot of SCCA Formula cars, Formula Fords, Formula Atlantics, Super Vs. So I had a lot of experience in real racing. In the early 80s, I was the U.S. Distribution and service point for the Mark Sports 2000, which is kind of like a little prototype, open cockpit prototype that used the 2-liter overhead cam Ford engine, dry sumped, and that was my background. This real racing, and an opportunity came along. I was working for a doctor friend of mine, putting his Jaguar cars together. And he also was a partnership part of a partnership in a Ford dealership. And he was out in California for a conference, and he had seen an article in a magazine about this guy that was building performance Mustangs that you could get through Ford dealers. And so he stopped and visited him. And after, I spent a whole afternoon with Steve. And what came out of that was the fact that Steve had just gotten his Saleen Mustangs homologated for the SCCA Pro Endurance Racing Series. And he had the cars homologated, he had the car, but he was kind of like, where do I go from here? So long story short, Dr. Dan, my friend, came back and talked to me. I had a couple conversations with Steve on the phone. And this was like early in the season, so it's like right before the Long Beach Grand Prix. So I flew out and met with Steve. We put a deal together. We sent some money out to help build the first car and start the Saleen racing program in early '86. Now the first car was actually because it was like so close to the beginning of the season. The first race was back then it was called Sears Point. Now I think it's called Sonoma. That the first car was built at Fred's shop up in Sacramento because it was just real close to the track. Well, I went out and I took Rex, my sidekick, with me. And we built the first car in Fred's shop and did Sears Point, and then right after that was the Portland race. And we did so well. I mean, and to me, looking back, it was kind of a comedy of errors, but at the time we did really well. General Tire was impressed, and the car was shipped from California, from Fred's shop back to my shop, which at the time was in Omaha. And we picked up, and then we built a second car from scratch. And so, in essence, this is the very first Mustang I ever built. And I have to put a big shout out and thanks to Steve for putting this program together and letting me participate. Because from that's kind of like it's changed my entire career path from pure racing into racing plus aftermarket performance street cars plus racing Mustangs. So that's how it all started. And then we built the first car, and I think the first race after that was 24 hours of Nelson Ledges. And it's like, it was only like Rex and I at the time building the car. And by the time we got the Nelson Ledges, we were beyond exhausted. I mean, it was like 18, 20-hour days for weeks on end. But we made it. We didn't do that great in the first race. First endurance race, but we, Liz and a couple of people got together. They did some analysis, and we figured out that we really kind of shot ourselves in the foot on a couple of yellow flags. So we learned a lot from that, and pretty much we went on. It was like our real starting point for the team was at Nelson Ledges, and we kind of continued on from that. So from there, we didn't do that great, but it was it was valuable. It was a valuable learning experience. But we went on, and the big thing in '86 was we won the 24 Hours of Canada, GT class of 24 Hours of Canada, which was a pretty big deal at the time. We were leading the race with a primary car, which had an accident like in the wee hours of the morning, and by the time we got it back to the pits, it was no way we could fix it and get it back on track. So what we did, we focused on the second car, which was driven by, I think, Lisa Caceres. I can't remember if Desiree was with us there that time or not. But that car, I think Desiree was there because she hit the wall, turned one wall, and qualifying or practice, and unbeknownst to us, the car was fairly wounded. But nevertheless, we were only able to do about 28 minutes on a stint because we were getting starved for fuel. Well, later we found out that when she hit the wall, there's a little can in the bottom that the fuel pump sits in. It actually knocked that loose. So what was happening, it was moving the fuel pump back and forth. So when it got to a certain level of fuel, it wouldn't have pickups. We just had to have continual pit stops. So I can't remember where the car was at the time, but it was third or fourth or somewhere back in there. So we focused 100% of our efforts on that car. We put Steve in that car, and we threw some really, really good strategy. I think, God, who was our strategy guy? Rick J, I think, was our strategy guy. He was brilliant. This is his friend Rick Titus. And, we kind of brought the car up front and won the race, which was huge. It was the first big win for the Saleen Mustang. First pro endurance win with the Mustang for Ford, and in that type of racing, and it was the first big win for General Tire. So everybody was happy. I was tired. Everybody was happy. So we went on and we finished out the season. We actually finished second in the points. For the first year, and me not knowing anything about Mustangs or endurance racing, I think that was we did pretty well. And then, I could come up with lots of stories, but the reason this all came up is last weekend we were at the Cruise Indy, and Mike Charles brought over the 19 Saleen Mustang that we had on display there, which was kind of cool. I think I can pull up a few more pictures here. Click all the right buttons. Okay. So this picture looks like it was at Mid-Ohio. It kind of looks like Mid-Ohio guardrails, which is another 24-hour race. And I got a story about that here in a minute. But this is last winter, I think. Mike Charles has become the caretaker and keeper and preserver of the 86, both of the 86. He now has both of the 86 Saleen R cars. And he's just a stone's throw away over in Ohio. And when he picked this one up, he had to come by and show me. And it was kind of like, oh, yeah, I remember these cars. It was a long, long time ago. But it was really, really kind of cool to see it. And then last weekend at the event, he brought that. And again, just so many fond memories of, Steve and Liz and Rick and Jay and, all the people that were on the team. Of course, Rex, my sidekick. I couldn't have done it without Rex. And that was kind of cool. And actually, Mike had remembered more stories about the 86 season than I did. And this is, again, this has to be at Mid-Ohio in the rain. And by the helmet, I would guess that's Steve driving at that point. And there was our driver lineup, Desiree, Lisa, Rick, and Steve. Pretty awesome group of people. Now, in looking at pictures, we kind of came across this, and I said, hey, Carrie, you got to pull that up because there's a story behind it. This is, if you notice, the car does not have a hood. And if you look closer, you can see a whole bunch of crumples and wrinkles and broken pieces. Well, that car happened to have an accident, again, in the wee hours of the morning, like 4 o'clock or something. And it did make it back to pit lane. And we actually rebuilt the front of the car in pit lane. We borrowed somebody's porta-power, and we actually used a porta-power to straighten out the nose of the car. It took a radiator, and we had to change a whole bunch of other parts. But it was the interesting thing is after straightening the pit line, I lined it by looking at it. We didn't have time to do an alignment. I just kind of looked at both tires and adjusted them where I thought they should be, and we sent it out. And the irony is that after that accident in this shape, the car turns at as fastest laps of the race. So that's why I had to throw that up there, because that was kind of, it's like, you have to scratch your head and figure, what? Okay, and this is our 86 team. That's pretty much it. There's, of course, I'm the guy with all the hair. And believe it or not, I had that much hair back then. There's Rex, my sidekick. Of course, Steve, Liz, Lisa, Rick, Kim, let's see, a lot of these people, oh, there's my late son, Paul, who a lot of you have probably known or know of. He, after winning the Pirelli World Challenge GTS Championship in 2011, unfortunately, he succumbed to melanoma cancer in 2012, and we lost him at the peak of his career. But this is kind of a cool picture. I mean, this is a fledgling team that went on to do really, really great things, kind of like all steered by Steve and myself. And proof of concept, I think this was an article after we won the 24 Hours of Canada, I think. And notice the CB radio. We had CB radios back then. I mean, this is back in '86. Things weren't all that sophisticated, and they hardly worked any of the time, but we had them anyway. And of course, here's another front page of Mustangs Illustrated after we won 24 Hours of Canada, which was back then. It was a huge deal for everybody. Let's see what. Oh, I guess that's all the pictures. I thought Kerry was going to put in the standings for that season, but looks like we didn't make it. Anyway, what we did, we actually finished second in the standings in the GT class, which was, for our first year, I thought that was pretty cool. And it was, I mean, it was a great time. I really, it was incredibly hard work. And anytime you're for a full-time professional race team, I mean, you're looking at the whole Saleen program. We were, a short day would be 14 hours. We were typically 16 to 18 hours days during the season. There's so much work to do. But, thanks to Steve and his foresight and me working my tail off, we achieved great things. '87, we came back and pretty much dominated the GT class. We walked away with all 4 national championships in one season, which is a pretty big feat. But that's after we had to completely re-engineer the cars, because the '86 cars were, I got to tell you, they were terrible race cars. I mean, the strength of the Mustang was its incredible robustness and durability. Okay, the cars were so strong and so robust, we could run them absolutely as hard as they would go for 24 hours with very, very few problems. Where we were racing against Porsche and some other cars, and if you run them in the 944s, I think, back then, and if you really run them as hard as they go, that was the only way we could compete with them, just run hard. We had really good motors. We had terrible brakes. I mean, terrible brakes. The front brakes were discs about this big, and the back were drums. We had to do a lot of brake changes. I thought, well, I'm going to be really clever. A friend of mine worked on some Daytona 24-hour teams, and he got me a set of brake pads off, I think, a 962 Porsche endurance pads, which actually we cut them off and we put them onto a Mustang backing plate, and they would actually go the full race without the pads having to be changed. Unfortunately, we had to change the rotors 3 times because it just ate through the rotors. But the other bad thing is with the drum brakes in the back. About every, I can't remember now, second or third pit stop for tires and fuel, I'd have to slide under the back of the car with my little tool, and I have to adjust the rear brakes up. Otherwise, it would have no brake pedal. And I think that the thing that in the 24 Hours of Canada, I think the one thing, if there's anything I can point to aside from everybody working really hard that helped us win that race, is in the middle of the night. Desiree was in the car, and she was just in. She weren't changing drivers. She was just getting tires and fuel, and she was in the pit. She was in, and the car was jacked up, and I was under the back adjusting the brakes. And the team in front of us, we were pretty novice that year, but we worked hard at being organized and really had our stuff together. The team in front of us were just, this is at Mosport. Total amateurs. It was like, I don't know if you're old enough, and you guys are old enough to remember the Keystone Cop. They just run around in circles, just like crazy, driving nuts. Well, at one point during the night, one of the drivers, completely consumed by the red mist, got his helmet on, he jumps in the car, he gets all buckled up, and he takes off with the fuel nozzle still in the car, pulled the entire fuel rig over into pit lane. As soon as I saw that, I just yelled, "Get her out of here." And she tiptoed through a huge pool of gas and got beyond that just as they closed the pit and wouldn't let anybody move. So she just barely got out of the pits in time because pit lane was closed for I don't know how many laps. But fortunately, we got enough gas in Desiree that she was able to, the full course yellow went for a long time, and the pits were closed for a long time. If we hadn't got her out when we did, she'd have been stuck there. And I think we probably would have finished second rather than first. So that's kind of one of those little things that you look back and you go, oh my gosh, that was so close to disaster. So I'm sure Mike's out there, maybe out there somewhere, and he'll probably have a story or two.
Actually, Kenny, I have a couple, just a comment since you're on the Saleens right now. I'll just ask you. James White asked, what was the rear suspension setup on the 86 cars? He's coming from the Speed Therapy Society Facebook group.
It was a stock Fox. You look at the geometry, like we talk about geometry in the academy. The rear roll center was like 18 inches above ground, which meant the cars did this all the time. It was a production-based class, which meant you couldn't change anything. Which in 87 we worked around that. In 86, the cars are pretty much just bone stock, except we had really good engines. A friend of mine, Bill, in Omaha, was a great engine guy. And to the point where the engines I spent days going through hundreds of, rockers, valve rockers, just picking the ones that had just a little bit more lift than all the rest of them because everything had to be stock. But we put a lot of effort into them. And then I think we're running Coney shocks that year. And the standard Saleen springs, whichever come on the Saleen production cars, because that's what we're supposed to run was production cars. Well, I came up through the season. I came up with a whole list of things for Steve that we needed to change for the production car for 87. Now in 86, one of the things we did to try to make the cars turn better is Road Atlanta. This car showed up with a 3-point strut tower brace on. First 3-point strut tower brace in modern era Mustangs, and they actually worked. The cars really helped them turn a lot better. The thing was, the SCCA tech guys came and say, "Wait a second, you can run those for this race, but don't bring them back because they're not part of the production car." Okay, so needless to say, the 87 production cars had 3-point strut tower braces. And the other thing that happened in 87 is. Towards the end of 86, we were working with the engineers at Ford in the Fox group. It was Fox, T-Bird, I think Mark 8 or something like that, in the X Garage. And one of them, Mike Jones, worked in suspensions, and he would spend his evenings, we'd be on the phone in the evenings, and he would run different simulations on the computer on front suspension geometry to get the cars to turn. And we came up with some ideas, but we really couldn't do anything until 87. And, Saleen, in all his magical ways of making things happen, I can't remember, it was the second race or so in 87 that I got a call from the airport that there was some parcels out there to be picked up. Came in by a private plane. Here were 3 brand new K-members right out of the factory that had 0 holes in it. No holes whatsoever, just all metal. So I spent an entire evening putting all the holes in the K-members where I wanted them based off of what Mike and I had figured out with the Ford computers as far as geometry. And when I got done, all painted up, they looked just like the brand new factory K-member. But every single hard point was moved. But that in combination with the 3-point strut tower braces and springs, the cars really would turn. One of the things that I did is Steve sent me the manufacturer has to fill out what's called homologation papers. They have to fill out this sheet of specifications on what's in the car. So for 87, they sent me the homologation papers to be filled out. And I won't go into all of it. There's some things, the way I listed them gave us some room to make things happen. One of them was on the springs. For the springs, the only specification for spring they had was the free length and the wire size. Okay, that was it. Free length and wire size. I had 3 different sets of springs wound at different coils. That I had 3 different spring rates, all that met the specifications for height and wire size, which is another little trick. I mean, the 87 cars were really good. And I think one day, Rex and my son Paul kind of maybe accidentally moved some of the pickup points in the rear suspension. I'm not sure that, I didn't see that, so I have plausible deniability. But we made the 87 cars work. So yeah, stock suspension 86, 87. We came a long ways in making them a lot better. But I can tell you, 86 cars were not good race cars. They were durable as hell. You just run the piss out of them all day and all night, but they're not particularly good at racing. In fact, the best way to slow a Mustang down was just pull up behind the Corvette and rest on the back bumper and wait for them to slow down. So, but okay, I probably should move on.
Well, actually, I thought I'd ask just one more thing. Mike texted me and said, "Hey, can you tell a little story about the Hertz? Is it Hertz rent-a-cars? What you did with the rent-a-cars?"
What we did with back then, budget was always a problem. So any of the races that we did, anybody that flew in had to rent a Mustang. So we'd have parts cars. Which really came in handy more than once. You talk about, it's parts department on wheels. So more than once we had to go to our rental cars to sort of borrow a few parts to make it through the race, which we did more than once. So that was kind of like our, we had every race we had a new parts department, so to speak.